You ready to go? Yep. All right.
Awesome. Okay. Well, let me introduce Tim Lawrence. I'm sure a lot of you know him from WSU. He's going to talk to us about improving pollinator habitat to increase seed and fruit set.
And I'm from the real Ohio, or OSU, which is Ohio State University, which beat Michigan. So, my talk is going to be a little, I don't know. I'm trying to get a different way of thinking about pollination. That we seem to be chugging along on this old mindset, and what I'm going to be promoting is how do we develop an agro-ecosystem that is pollinator friendly. And I don't care if we're talking about honeybees, bumblebees, mason bees, you name it, bees. We need to change the dynamics to make it more compatible with the species. So first of all, what is a pollinator? What is pollination? Pollination is simply the very short period of time crucial in the plant's life where pollen is moved from the anthers to the stigma of a compatible plant. Once the pollen is on the stigma, pollination is over. From then on, it's fertilization. And different variables affect fertilization than do pollination. So it's just the means of transferring that pollen. And over time, different mechanisms have evolved. Many of them have to do with the transfer with animals, like various types of insects. And not all pollinators are created equal. This is a study that is a little bit on the obscure side, but I found it interesting in that it showed that honeybees were more effective than bumblebees, primarily because honeybees are larger units than bumblebees. On a bee for bee basis, clearly bumblebees are better pollinators, especially on some crops like blueberries. But not just because you see some type of insect activity doesn't necessarily mean there's a transfer of pollen occurring, or that the transfer of compatible pollen is actually occurring. What makes a good pollinator? Hairy bodies. I always like to joke that I think that's why my wife picked me, but I could be wrong. So, but having some type of means of a carrying capacity, either the scopa, which is on the abdomen of the bee, or the corbiculum on the hind leg of the bee. And what the bees are doing as they're going through is they're grooming themselves, and they groom themselves in rather a sloppy manner. And as they're grooming, some of that pollen grain is actually falling off and landing on the stigma. Well, the bee is taking usually from the front leg, transferring it to the middle leg, and they literally pound the pollen on the corbicula. When it's in the corbicula, they spit on it a little bit, it's there, it's no longer really available. Not a lot of pollen grains are going to fall off of the corbiculum. They have the ability to utilize it for food source. They have specific types of visions, and there are other cues that we are learning. For instance, when bees fly, they develop a positive static charge, and when they land on a flower, there's a negative charge on the flower, and the pollen can literally jump from the pollen or from the anthers onto the bee. And floral consistency, that's one of the things that honeybees are very good at. When they are on a mission on a particular blueberry, almond, whatever, they are consistent with that species of flower throughout their pollen trip on any one given trip. They may be recruited to go to a different plant once they get back to the hive, and there's an excited bee that says there's maple over there. It's a lot better for us if we go in that direction. But having floral consistency is an extremely important. And this is what I'm talking about. The pollen grains on the hairy body of the bee, and if you look at a bee hair, on the body, it's like a feather, and there's multiple places where that pollen grain can actually land, and it's in that grooming process and those pollen grains falling off of the bee onto the stigma where the majority of pollination occurs. And native pollinators are very important. Much of what I'm going to talk about is more honeybee oriented, but I give full value to native bees. I am not one of these, yes, go for honeybees, or honeybees are bad, we only need to have native bees. All bees are good. All bees are going to function in terms of what we're trying to do, and that's get seed set. And, you know, I stole this from the USDA, so it must be true. And you look at some of the plants in terms of, you know, almonds are extremely dependent because of a heavy pollen that they have to have transfer from pollen from one pollinator variety to another. But one of the problems with honeybees is they like to follow straight rows. They don't like to cross between, which is a problem. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but just stick that in the back of your head. And then, you know, what the value is, you can see in 2004, Berger out of the other OSU, I don't know sure what happened there, but for the most part, bees are estimated to be around $18 to $20 billion in the U.S., over $200 billion worldwide, and that is not even taking into consideration native plants that bees pollinate. So they're important. And what I give lots of talks to pesticide groups and to growers that growing businesses, and the importance of bees for pollination. What Andoni said is absolutely true. We're not, you know, there's this thing when I attributed to Einstein, which he apparently never said, that when honeybees go extinct or bees go extinct, man will go extinct 4 years later. Bogus. We won't have a very nice diet. We'll eat a lot of rice and wheat and other things. But if you see any of those fruits and vegetables that you enjoy, you can thank bees for it of one type or another. Now, there are certainly alternators. Uh-oh, IT guy is coming.
Oh, you're on your own computer.
Yeah.
You're on Zoom running right now?
What's that?
Zoom. You don't have Zoom running?
No, I don't.
Yeah, the far side can't see you.
Okay.
Let me quickly, just take me, didn't realize you're using your own computer.
That's because Macs are so seamless. It just...
Should take about 30 seconds.
So that picture, you know, it's from National Geographic, and they can attribute it that in this region of China, it's so polluted that there's no bees around, and so they have to hand pollinate it. I wasn't there. I didn't take the photograph, but I also know that Asians are very particular about the quality of their fruit, and I think that may be, in fact, a little bit of...
Are you on the internet? No.
It may be that they are just trying to augment the pollination by hand pollination.
Okay. Try one more time.
I'm on now, so I just... So anybody want to throw things at me other than my OSU comment while we're waiting here? So, but which, by the way, you know, if it wouldn't be as much fun if U of M, Michigan, people didn't get so upset at the fact that Ohio State has beat them 14 out of the last 15 showings. So, you know,
okay.
we could have a lousy year all year long. As long as we win that one game, we're good.
Go to your PowerPoint and you should be fine.
So that's the other thing is I don't use PowerPoint. Oh, really? So you folks from afar, sorry about the, but so here we are with the alternative to pollination. Can I close this box without causing a problem? Yeah.
Where's my mouse? How come I can't see the mouse?
Well, we'll just not worry about it.
Okay.
Okay. So, and there is work being done in a number of places, University of Sussex and not that where they are trying to develop drones. And I saw a drone that's flying over crops, disseminating pollen. I don't see there any problem with all these little mechanical devices flying all over your vineyard or orchard or field whatsoever. Unfortunately, right now, the only drone that actually works is one that has a tether to a source, a power source. So unlikely to be something that is very effective very soon. And there is some work being done by Washington State University of mechanical spraying on of pollen, and they're getting some reportedly good results with apple pollination and cherry pollination. However, I have yet to see a publication out of the Whiting lab on this, and that's kind of the standard we go by is has it been published in peer-reviewed journals, and so far, yet. But, you know, I actually was listening to Whiting give his presentation, and I made the change as I was actually listening to the talk about, I'm going to bet on bees. We have a very good animal that is evolved to be able to do pollination. Why are we spending millions of dollars to find a substitute when I think we can do things a lot cheaper, a lot more cost effective by making it more compatible for this type of animal to be able to service pollination, regardless of the type. I think you absolutely have to talk about modern beekeeping and the relationship with the almond industry in terms of the impact that it has on the quality of bees that come out of California and the type of bees that are going into California. I'll talk in a little bit about there's more than one type of honeybee. A lot of people are surprised by that. But because of the almond industry and demand for 12 frames of bees minimum in order to get full pollination credit, they only go with the Italian honeybee. And then, so, you know, bees come from all over the country. So this is literally influencing how beekeeping is conducted and how beekeepers operate throughout the nation as they all migrate to California. You know, take a look at that one picture. I was in Lost Hills, California, and stood on a hill and overlooked 84,000 honeybee colonies, all in the same location. And they were there from September until almonds bloom in February on artificial stimulus, artificial feed the whole time. And there's another talk I give which talks about why that is not such a good thing, but I'm going to refer to it a bit later on. And with the almonds, as I mentioned earlier, the bees tend to follow the pollinator row. They don't cross between pollination, which is a problem for almond growers. And then once that's over with, they want them out of there, and they go in various directions, either for pollination up here or then eventually into honey production in the Midwest. And this is the shot I was mentioning, 84,000 honeybee colonies, industrialized beekeeping. I have to take my hat off to the beekeepers who have developed this technology in order to be able to do this, but the implications from disease spread to nutrition to their overall impact and health of the bees is now starting to manifest itself. Then we also have colony collapse disorder, and what exactly is that? We've all heard about it. You know, this paper in 2010 listed some 61 variables associated with colony collapse disorder, none of which were the definitive cause. But as one beekeeper mentioned to me, as the Washington State beekeeper, Tim, it's Varroa, it's Varroa, it's Varroa. That is the implications of what that is. I'm going to deviate a little bit because I think it's important that you understand what's affecting the viability of honeybee colonies in pollination. And Varroa is, if you do not treat your colony within a 2-year period, that colony will die. And it's more complex than that in that the Varroa mite reduces the overall immune system of the bees, making them more susceptible to various viruses. And there's a whole list of viruses that, in fact, can cause real harm to honeybees. And what we're finding now is that there is actually a synergistic effect. As the Varroa affects the immune system of the bee, the viruses have a better hold on the bee, which makes the reproduction of the varroa mite even better. So this is chronic thing that actually occurs in terms of especially with some of these viruses, that where the bees develop something which the beekeepers euphemistically call snot brood, because that's what your brood looks like. And when it's at that level, the colony is going to go downhill and not recover. So, and just to summarize that, and this from the nutritional perspective, as the bees get new nutrition and without the virus or without the varroa mite, the immune system is built up, the viruses reduce, the brood is more viable, there's more bees in the population, they go out and get more pollen, they build up in strength, and it's a positive cycle. With the introduction of the varroa, the bees come in, they get infected with varroa, they get infected with various types of viruses. The colony is greater brood mortality, more bees are dying. The colony has fewer bees out foraging, being able to build up the nutrition, and the colony just starts to go downhill. Why did I talk about this? I'm hoping to be able to tie this all back together again real soon. What WSU is doing is trying to find alternative ways of immune suppression. And interestingly, I'm just throwing this in because it's kind of cool, is we're actually finding that mycelium fungus is actually can be beneficial to reducing the viral loads and improving the honeybee immune system. And we're currently working on some very positive research where we'll be able to feed mycelium to the bees and improve the viral loads, making them stronger and more effective in terms of their overall pollination. But the other key aspect and an important aspect of what's happening with bees and bee decline is loss of habitat. We need pollination habitat in order to have healthy bees. And there's, granted, I'm going to show a slide at the very end where we did a video on neonicotinoids and pesticides. I don't doubt that that neonicotinoids and pesticides and fungicides are generally not good for bees, but you can watch the video and get my take on the whole thing. There are ways of mitigating it, and this is from the other OSU as well as WSU in terms of reducing bee poisoning, and I strongly suggest that you find that publication. It's available at wsupubs.edu. But part of the problem in pollination, and this is an almond orchard, is we have this misconception that if we only give our crop as a choice to the bees, they're going to go to that crop and they're going to get good pollination. When I was a commercial beekeeper back in the 70s and the 80s, it was not uncommon for us to pull into an almond orchard and have our radiator filled with mustard flowers because there was such a diverse mixture of pollen and floral sources within the orchard itself. That does not exist anymore. This is more typical of what you see in an almond orchard than what we might want to see, which is something along these lines. Now, I'm not suggesting in all cases that planting flowers in between your crop or in or near your crop is the best approach, but I think it's something that we need to take into consideration, that bees do well on a diversity of flower sources, pollen sources, for a variety of reasons. From the native bees' perspective, having a diversity of pollen, because they have shorter lifespans, the only individual that overwinters in the bumblebee is the queen, and when that very relatively short period of time, they need to have pollen sources throughout the bloom, beyond when your crop, or earlier than when your crop is blooming, in order for them to develop and build up a habitat, for them to be able to proliferate. If you want to have native bees, you need to have habitat out there, which is going to support them for a period of time. In terms of for honeybees, it is, oops, I missed a slide there, sorry. But the thing to remember is that pollen is the only source of protein that that any bee gets. But there are numerous other micronutrients, and I want to especially point out the sterols that are becoming increasingly of interest to key researchers. Most notably, and she was here not long ago, is Dr. Jerry Wright, who is now at Oxford University looking at bee nutrition and finding some of these macronutrients, micronutrients that are extremely important for the bee's health. And what we've also, some work out of University of Israel have shown that bees will actually change their foraging behavior based on the nutritional needs of the colony. And they will fly anywhere up to 10 kilometers or 5 miles in order to meet their nutritional demands. So if you only have a pollen source from your crop that does not meet all of the nutritional demands of the colony, that colony is going to change its behavior and go out and seek what they need from a nutritional standpoint. So it makes sense of having the pollen sources as close to your field as possible is going to reduce the number of trips and decrease the number of bees that have to go out and seek that nutritional demand in order to stimulate bee activity. This is going to be a shocker, but bees give diddly squat about your blueberries, your raspberries, your cherries, or your almonds. It's all about their reproduction. What is going to stimulate bees in order to go out and get the pollen, to get the nectar, to build up their colony? It's pollen and pollen source, and whatever that source is going to be, they are going to go out and find it. I was going to skip this slide, but it was brought up, and I think that it's just people are pulling numbers out of thin air on this one. Well, 1 to 7. I've actually heard in carrot pollination they're up to 14. Well, it depends on a number of variables, a number of factors. I think it's a mistake to think that you can go by and count the number of bees coming in and out of a colony and get a good idea of colony strength. Almond growers don't do it. Almond growers hire people who know how to look in a beehive, and I would be glad to give a lesson to anybody who wants to know how to get into a beehive with minimal number of stings. It's not that hard to do, and randomly select colonies and find out exactly how strong that colony is. There are a lot of variables. Different bees fly at different temperatures. Carniolan bees fly at a lower temperature than Italian bees, but most commercial beekeepers only use Italian. Why? Because of the almond industry. So the bees fly at different times of the day. You go out and look at a poppy flower in the morning and you'll find bees all over them. You go out and look at poppies in the afternoon, you'll find no bees on them. So there are a lot of factors that affect. You can see a lot of activity coming in and out of a hive because that colony is so weak, other bees are robbing it. If you don't know what robbing looks like and how bees change their behavior when they're robbing, oh, look at that, I got great bees, yeah. But you crack that colony open and the bees all take off when you open it up because they're all robbers from other colonies. So don't rely on counts on how many bees are coming in and out. It's extraordinarily deceptive, and I say that with 56 years of beekeeping experience. Hire somebody who can crack the hive open or learn how to do it yourself, randomly select so many colonies, crack the hive in half, look up and see, do you have bees up there? Do you have bees down there? Count the bees that way. It's worth the expense. If you're spending $55 and you're going between, well, do I put in 2 colonies per acre or do I put in 5 colonies per acre? That $150 that you're paying extra is probably going to pay off by having an inspector come out and check all of your colonies. Something that's not done in the north, routinely done in California. Okay, I'll get off my, and this is the type of bee. So we have Italian, which is the yellow bee, broods up like mad, big, beautiful colonies, eats up all of their stores over the winter time, so they have to be fed all the time, but they don't fly at very low temperatures. Carniolan and Caucasian, evolved in the Caucasus Mountains and in Eastern Europe, in the Yugoslavian area, they fly at much lower temperatures than the Italians do. But beekeepers are probably not going to stock them because they're not going to change from Italians to Carniolans or to Caucasians in between when they're in almond pollination and when they come to pollinate for your crop. But there are differences in the types of bees. You can have somebody who has Carniolans and they are able to take them down to California and bring them up here. I would say that they're going to give you a better pollination in cooler climates. So what happens? We know that what stimulates a queen to lay eggs is incoming pollen. She will start laying eggs. When the queen is laying eggs, the larva is actually communicating with pheromones, telling the bees, I need this nutrition, I need this level of feed. And that stimulates more bees to go out and get more pollen, more nutrition. If there's a deficiency, they do some collective decisions as to what the colony needs. And as I showed earlier, there is research that shows they will change their behavior based on the nutritional demands of the colony. So just to kind of make it a little simpler, the pollen stimulates the queen lays eggs, that stimulates foragers to go out and get more pollen, which stimulates the queen to lay more eggs. So what we've been able to show, and this is some work out of UC Davis and the University of California, Berkeley, that I mentioned that honeybees like to follow the pollinator rows. When they found that when osmia bee is in the orchard with the honeybees, it changes honeybee behavior where they start crossing between rows, and it changes their behavior within the canopy. They also were able to show this in sunflower. So here there's an idea. We need both honeybees and native bees in order to really maximize overall pollination and seed set. Work out of the University of Michigan that has, with Rufus Isaac's group, has shown that when you plant in around blueberries, fields around the blueberries with wild flowers, you get an increase in both bumblebees and syrphid flies, not in honeybees because honeybees are brought in and out on demand. So by having a pollination area where bees can forage and develop, the native bees are able to exist and be in your field and your orchard for longer periods of time, it will also help the honeybees in terms of what their nutritional demands are. It's going to increase overall activity and competition within the colonies. It can be brutal out there when you're a bee and you have other bees. I mean, you have bees ramming into other bees and knocking them off flowers when you have enough bees pollinating. And there's lots of research to suggest this. These are just a few studies, but more and more are looking at, and we need to change our mindset and support more research. And I'm going to retire within 2 years, so I'm not lobbying for myself, but we need to put more money into understanding pollination ecology, understanding what we need for an agro-ecosystem that is pollinator friendly. And there are a lot of benefits. I give talks to master gardeners, and I'm trying, it makes a more pleasant surrounding in urban areas. There are lots of areas where you can really provide an abundance of food and benefits. And having an abundance of food that comes on sequentially, having a diversity of flowers, not just one type of flower, and minimize the pesticide use. There are publications that are out there which will help you understand which crops are better. I particularly like Dutch clover. It's a very good source of nectar for the bees. Poppy, which I mentioned, is a great nutritional source for bees. It has lots of the macronutrients that they need. So in and around, allowing areas to go that are beneficial for bees is going to, I think, benefit you. We need the research to get down to the dynamics of it, but you see more and more beekeepers, more and more growers, both in California and here in Washington, allowing flowers to grow within their orchard. I was out visiting with some apple growers earlier this year, and they still have that habit. You know, this guy with the grower was walking through the field with me, and there's a bee on a dandelion. He kicks it and goes, "Get up there, get up there." But you know, it's just a matter of trying to change the mindset. She's on a dandelion. Maybe that's helping to stimulate other bees to go out and get nectar off of the apples. So it's a dynamic thing that goes on in the bee colony, and we need to be able to maximize that. There's also an app if you want to find out. But I also wanted to, and I'll try and stop this. This is, if you want to know my thoughts on pesticides, especially neonicotinoids, this is an hour-long video. It's available free. I'll stop it again. And you can watch it. What we found is that, you know, and there's no doubt that neonicotinoids are not good for bees, but clearly from our research and looking at 149 apiaries throughout the state, they are only exposed to neonicotinoids in agricultural areas, and that can be something that we can mitigate and control. But it's not as detrimental as some people might portray. And if nothing else, what I want to, oops, let me go back here and play once again. Okay. There's one last slide that I want to show, which I always like to show because it's a very hammy thing to do, but it really brings home the point that bees are animals that are stimulated and they will respond in a predicted manner. I'm able to do this because I know how to stimulate bees to go into the swarming. What you need to do is, how do you stimulate bees in order to pollinate and pollinate effectively? And I think that the key is going to be addressing the nutrition of the bees, what turns them on, and what gets them out there and pollinating. And with that, if you doubt my confidence in this, the guy in the center is the provost of Washington State University. I went up for promotion 2 weeks before or after this, and he is the last person to sign my promotion. So, you know, he was a great trooper. We were able to do a little bit of a fundraiser, ended up raising $112,500 for the WSU Bee Lab as a result of this. But if nothing else, understand that we need to know more about the dynamics of pollination and pollination ecology, what stimulates bees, and what gets them to actually visit our flowers in a more effective manner, and not get hung up on how many bees do I need. With all due respect, I would not rely on an undergraduate's research. I think we need to do a lot more work in order to understand exactly the dynamics of what's going on in the colonies and in the fields in order to stimulate bees. But we need to look at how do we develop an agro-ecosystem that is pollinator friendly, and my advice to you is plant more flowers. Yes?
Oh. Okay, Mike.
Okay. An observation that at one particular year, I got 5 different varieties of blueberries, and they all come on blooming normally at a different time. But this particular year, the whole acreage all came into bloom, and I'm just putting nutrient sprays on, but noticing that there's no bees at all in this territory, and the bushes are loaded with flowers. And finally kind of realized that once you start smelling the perfume of the pollen, then all of a sudden the bees are there. That caused me to add more hives per acre because of our weather here. That sometimes the window isn't very good for the bees to come out of the colony to pollinate. Another thing I noticed that this may have lost the page. Some of the people that are spraying, they better really understand that if you go out because you want to put a pesticide on, but you got neighboring bees, if you go out and spray in your own field, these bees are flying across the field. You're legally responsible for those bees that you killed. because of it. But so a lot of people have got to be a little concerned with not me, myself, and I.
Well, to answer the last one, I think that following the recommendations from the how to avoid bee spray, especially during the bloom period, spraying at night, avoiding any application, and even fungicides can cause significant problems to bees. But I think in a broader picture, and I just gave a talk to the Noxious Weed Control Board of when we go out and control noxious weeds, we need to go in and reseed with dicots, flowering plants, and not just grass seed. Because the beekeeper, in order to have strong colonies, in order to meet your needs, have to bring them in from somewhere where they've been able to get that nutrition. The bees just don't turn on as soon as they come into your field. They need to come in strength. Understand, from the time the egg is laid until the worker emerges is 21 days, and it's another 3 weeks before the nurse bee has become or house bee has become a field bee for foraging. So we really need to change the whole dynamics from how we have in areas where beekeepers need to keep their colonies a strong strength. In regard to your first question, I am extraordinarily skeptical about spraying of brood pheromone or pheromones on flowers in order to get more bee visitation. What you're seeing, you might be seeing more bees out there, but are you seeing bees that are actually actively pursuing pollen? The research does not support using of stimulants to get bees in the field. I won't go so far as to say it's snake oil, but I would be very skeptical about paying money for pheromones that may attract the bees there, but you want bees that are stimulated to actually seek pollen, to seek nectar, to actually do what they are out there you want them to do. Yes. Go ahead. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
So I'm actually from BC, and I work with a number of blueberry growers there. So we're in a little bit worse state than people in Washington State, because they're bringing in bees that have been on almonds. They're a little bit stronger already. We're basically dealing with bees that haven't been doing anything except for overwintering. And the other issue is here, blueberries is one of the first things that blooms. They bloom pretty much in line with cherries. There's not much else blooming at the time. Is there things besides flowers that growers can be doing to improve the strength of the bee colonies?
Well, making sure you have a good beekeeper and making sure the colony has a degree of strength. We service Kona Queen, which is the largest queen producer in the world, and they told us that most of their sales to Canada are with carniolans. So it's something that Canadian beekeepers recognize as a good stock. So I would strongly encourage your beekeeper to restock with either carniolan or Caucasian bees. It's a cooler bee. It flies at a lower temperature. They don't build up as strong as early, but once that pollen comes in, they really stimulate and they almost explode in a very short period of time. So either carniolan or Caucasian is what I would recommend. And there's no substitute for flowers. Yes. Well, I don't know if it's legal, but down in Island County where I am at, there's poppy flowers right in front of the sheriff's department. So I assume that it is.
Because in Canada, I guess they plowed the poppy field, I guess 12, 13 acres. It was for commercial sale. I don't know, for state of Washington, it's allowed or not.
Well, I don't know of any law that prohibit growing of poppies, and I don't know if they yield the substance that they make opium or whatever off of the poppy.
That's the main thing.
Yeah. But I imagine if you're out there cutting little slits in the opium or on the opium seed pod, you might get into some trouble. But from a nutritional perspective, and California poppies, you get honeybees working that. It's interesting. Again, honeybees are working California poppies, the orange ones. in only certain times of the day. Other times of the day, you go out there and there's no activity, and you'll see that a lot. So just because you don't see bees on the flowers at a given time, they may be there at a different time. It's the dynamic that goes on within the beehive. But what I'm talking about, and Dr. Wright is about to publish a list of plants that she thinks are the best from a nutritional standpoint for bees. But in the academic world, you have to wait until it's accepted by a journal in order to. But I'm pressing her hard to get that information. That's what we need. What type of flowers that are out there that are good for bees? From my perspective, and I plant a lot of flowers around mine, I go for the easy stuff. Phacelia or purple tansy is a very good long blooming plant that the bees do very well on. Borge, my neighbor hates it. He thinks it's a weed, but I tell him I'm just doing a managed weed patch on my property. But, you know, a different type of nectar and pollen sources is what you want. And clumps of flowers. So if you don't want it inside your orchard, and that's a problem if you're having to spray pesticides because you don't want that pesticide drifting on, but having it in close proximity, having it within a quarter of a mile, well out of the way where you get drift, but not so far that the bees are having to fly 5 miles in order to get that. It may only take a few bees to meet the nutritional demands. And so the fewer bees that you have, meaning that they don't have to fly as far, is going to be a positive. And I really think we need to work with growers and trying to experiment with different ideas. And it's going to be different for raspberries or for blueberries or for almonds. Not one size is going to fit all. We need to look at and understand the dynamics of what we need in order to improve the dynamics of pollination ecology.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry, I'll get
great talk. Thank you. It's really interesting. This is not really a question. It's just a thought. I read a paper a while ago about wild habitat in orchard in Sacramento, California. And they found that with the more habitat, they also found more pest issues such as bird and deer. I don't know, would that be a problem for the blueberry field? If you have more wildflowers, you probably could have more
but you may also have more beneficial insects out there.
Yeah, that's true.
So
that's what you showed there. The Isaac study in Michigan, he also studied the beneficial insects.
Yeah. So
it's just a thought.
Again, we don't know enough. We're still relying on studies from which Dan Mayer from the 1970s, who was at Washington State University and didn't make it past his third-year review, and he moved on, which tells you a lot. But we're still relying on his publication in terms of recommendations in pollination. So.
Hey, Tim, that was a great talk. I just wanted to bring to light some work that Bev Gerdeman and myself did. What we did for one full year is we sampled different types of border habitats adjacent to blueberry plantings, both outside and within, every 2 weeks from bloom all the way through harvest. And we also our grower cooperators were gracious enough to give us pesticide information. And what we found that in the field, that populations of arthropods, both beneficials, pollinators, pests, they really kind of followed it with the pesticide applications. And so one of the take-home messages that we derive from the study is that, you know, the spotted winged Drosophila in particular really seem to drive the habitat of all sorts of arthropods within the field, not necessarily adjacent to the field, but within the field. So that, you know, in a way, we're kind of thinking it might be a challenge to try to get alternative pollinators into the field and other types of biological control organisms with the current spotted winged Drosophila management practices that growers have to follow. Do you have any thoughts about that or comments?
Well, I wouldn't rely on just 1 year's data in order to make an assessment, but you know, I think we really need to focus more on all the dynamics that go on, all the things that you have to consider, from spotted winged Drosophila to having, you know, a good pollination habitat. We need more information in order to address those questions and concerns, but we can do it. I mean, it's just a matter of how you turn bees on. You know, they are stimulated bees. And so my specialty is honeybees and what gets them excited. And I go into a beehive when bees are on a good honey flow or a good pollen flow, and it is night and day as opposed to when there's a dearth going on, there's nothing happening. And from a nutritional standpoint, I think there's a lot needs to be addressed. So I can't answer your question, but did you have a question? Oh, you passed him.
I'll pass him. Sorry about that.
A lot of good information about the food for pollinators. What about habitat needs for native pollinators and how we can change practices in the field, or what practices we can do to conserve habitat for overwintering and nesting native pollinators?
Well, it goes hand in glove in terms of exactly what you need for stimulating the habitat for native pollinators, and that's not my area of expertise or specialty. But most of your, other than honeybees, it's only a single individual or a immature that survives the winter time. So having habitat where they can survive in that, and bumblebees like that interface between forested areas and clearing areas, but having, you know, what was shown earlier of putting out bumblebee nests in your area, making whatever habitat. I don't know if that's addressing what your concern was, but we need to be able to make sure that there are places where bees can overwinter and have a early stimulus to be able to build up. You know, the queen is the sole, a bumblebee queen is the sole individual initially. So she goes out and she starts to collect pollen and nectar, and that stimulates her to lay eggs, and she's both the nurse and the forager until the colony gets up to size. So if you have an early blooming crop, you need to have earlier blooming flowers in order to get them out pollinating and building up. In my area, the currants are some of the earlier blossoms that are blooming, and I see bumblebees all over it. I know that's when I want to go out and do some trapping. That's when I'm wanting to do it, because of the bumblebees being is probably the queens that I'm going after. So anything we can do to increase habitat is really the take-home message. So
yeah, as an observation, I got a little bit bothered by some of my beekeepers, so I decided what I'm going to do is just let the natural bees that I have around, because we had enough, supposedly enough, bees. And about the 1st of June in the blueberries, one of my crew said, "You better come on out here and take a look at this." And you take a hoe handle and hit against the blueberry bush, and they just 80% of all the berries on the bush all dropped on the ground. It was mainly because of non-pollination. And so I went and I bought, everybody better bless beekeepers, because I went and I bought up about 55 hives, and for a couple of years, everything got fine. And all of a sudden, middle of February, I was going to go out and see about feeding them, or if they needed some food. And I think about 90% of all my hives were dead.
Yeah.
And that's when all that news from Canada and everywhere else started flying across. That and now the beekeeper has to do so many different things. It's almost a full-time job. It's no more of just letting them be in the hive and grab the honey when you want it.
Yeah, it is difficult. You know, there's a reason that they're getting $200 a colony. When I was a commercial beekeeper, for almond pollination down in California, I got $25 to $30 a colony, and now it's $200 a colony, and it takes a lot. So we're not going to lose bees. Beekeepers are in the business of making bees, and we do that very well. But you know, it takes a lot of input in order to have a good, strong colony. But you know, it's also putting the pressure on the beekeeper in order to make sure that you're having good, strong colonies. A lot of beekeepers will make divides, and what they're doing is simply splitting the colony in half. And so where there used to be one colony, there's now two colonies. You might initially think, well, I should only pay half the price for that. But in fact, bees in the trees don't do you any good at all. And what the beekeeper is doing is artificially swarming, and you have put a new queen in there. The new queens lay more eggs, stimulate, and run faster. So you're actually good beekeeping practice by having beekeepers that make divides and put in new young queens. What you want to do is do some definitive research on how many frames of bees are needed for whatever crop you're dealing with, and then paying somebody. And there are businesses that started up in California. There's no reason why it couldn't happen here, of having a broker who goes out and puts the beekeeper's feet to the fire, that if you're going to get paid, if you have 3 frames of bees, I'm only going to give you $20 a colony. But if you have 6 to 8 frames of bees, I'm going to give you $55 a colony. Stimulates the beekeeper to make sure you have good pollinating units.
Yeah. A question about distribution. We've all heard that bees will fly miles, but it's one thing is having enough bees, but what about, like on a larger farm, we have them in less places as opposed to spreading them out. We've had heated discussions about this.
Yeah, well, bees' preference is to forage within 800 meters of the colony. But they will fly a farther distance. So, especially in bad weather, they're going to forage out. So it's, finding a suitable compromise in terms of, but not having all the bees in one spot and expect probably going to get more pollination closer to the colonies in bad weather conditions. If there's enough forage and if enough competition out there, it will. So having drops of, say, 4 hives to a pallet, 5 pallets to a drop, is something that where the beekeeper can undo it. But expecting the beekeeper to drop 1 pallet and then drive so far and drop another pallet, probably, finding a compromise between what works for the beekeeper and what works for you. And it's going to be a lot of trial by error. What works in one area may be different. So you know your field and your location better than anybody. So that answer your question, but it depends. It's my favorite saying. It depends.
All right. So here we go again.
Okay.
I find it kind of strange. We've got a lot of crossroads in my fields. And so a lot of times to make it easy for the beekeeper and their forklift to set the bees off, I kind of put them in a lot of my roadways. But I find it like when I'm driving the tractor through, the bees will come out and they'll follow the roadway, kind of get on the bee freeway. Anyway, it was kind of quite interesting on it.
Yeah, you will see them following rows and whatnot. But bees are out there doing a lot of different things. Bees have a tremendous demand for water, and a lot of people don't understand that. Word of caution: when you're spraying pesticide, also watch out for standing water, because they'll bring it back to the colony. So there are a lot of variables that go on that makes a colony a pollinating unit. So, yeah, but they will follow the path of least resistance. They're not any different than we are. I mean, they're going to expend as little energy as they can in order to accomplish their goal.
Awesome. Well, I think we've taken up enough of your time, Tim.
So,
thanks for answering all those questions for us. And I think we're actually it's not on the schedule, but I think we're going to take a quick break here. We're running ahead, and I think everyone could use maybe some coffee. I think we'll meet back here in about 10 minutes at 9:40. So if you make your way back in, we'll have another talk by Anthony. And a note about those clickers that y'all are holding. You're actually going to